In the second half of the 19th century, the evolutionists incorporated Reel's second principle, or actually third principle, synesthesia, by calling it the primary body sense. And in spite of the classic dichotomies of external and internal perception of the body-mind split, it was still maintained on a practical level that mental life was determined by sensory activity. Even in the 1890s, Theodore Ribot wrote in his Diseases of Personality that personality varied as organic physical sensations varied. Therefore, the unity of the ego was intrinsically dependent on both consciousness and physiology. And the unconscious, as it was then perceived, continued to find its origin in the life of the body. We know all this from Foucault. Foucault will talk about this, but I didn't use Foucault in this paper. Happy to say. Ironically, this viewpoint locked the psyche inside the realm of medicine and supported Charcot's theater of hysteria, which essentially was a scientific laboratory that measured and recorded human examples of psychic pain, female in particular. And during this time, the search for a cure for madness was dangerously reductive and biologically determinist. In 1900, Freud clearly opposed such an approach. He maintained that while mental suffering may express itself through the body, it was ultimately linked in origin to the psychic process alone. This groundbreaking paradigm shift relocated the unconscious by assigning it the task of being custodian of language and the producer of puzzles, palimpsests that were then open to being deciphered. In other words, it was from within the mechanism of human language making that the life of the body could be tapped and understood. But this new approach did something else. It moved psychic healing again, this time from the world of science, the medical, and placed it in the world of symbols, metaphor, and metonymy. And by the first quarter of the 20th century, the interpretation of truths of the unconscious with its labyrinthine potential for creativity, obfuscation, became the project of psychoanalysis. Are you with me here? I'm trying to follow out.
Yes.
Okay.
Following exactly.
What?
Very clear.
Okay, good. The systematic investigation of body feeling and body movement as it related to personality and personal history was abandoned. And by this time, there were very few clinicians who believed that the body could be a direct source or place of psychic suffering. Rather, the body was a house with no direct connection to its contents, or for that matter, consciousness. Now, we're getting to it. This is why Charles Sherrington, British neuropathologist, who coined the term proprioception in 1906, was unable to confirm a marriage between mental processes and a physiological experience. His discoveries were far-reaching. For the first time, identifying the nervous system's ability to converge from a multiplicity of directions, one firm patterned response. However, Sherrington was not able to prove or disprove that in his own words, psychical events accompany the nervous reaction of the spinal animal. In other words, it was a huge discovery in 1906 to realize that the nervous system was so broad that there had to be a place where there was just one patterned response, and that's where proprioception comes in. You have to have this point of contact. You can't just be like, you can't have proprioception in outer space. You have to have gravity, you have to have pressure, but you also have to have a letting go into the pressure. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. There persisted an interest in methods for reading the body in psychotherapeutic situations. Sandor Ferenczi, 1916, observed expressive body movements as they occurred in the psychoanalytic sessions. Alport and Vernon, in the 30s, studied human movement style as a reflection of personality. Wilhelm Reich, we all know him, made his character analysis based on scanning the physical self in musculature, posture, gait, gesture, breathing. Deutsch, Mahler, and Lowen, all in the 40s and 50s, all looked at body movement in relation to development and psychoanalytic principles. And Warren Lamb, who not a lot of people know about, does anybody know him in the 60s was doing work called posture-gesture merging, a technique for observing movement, style, and integration with emotional states. In the 70s, Judith Kestenberg, who I have studied, was using log-on movement analysis with the psychoanalytic grid to examine early childhood and mother-child interaction. Current with these personality body language therapies were the developmental movement theorists, of which Arnold Gesell in the 40s was one, who viewed the human movement infant as a growing action system, whose specifically sequenced movements led to the infant's ability to function in the world both cognitively and spatially. Now, we want to ask, did Olson read Gesell? This is a very important, for further research, I'm asking everybody. Did he read these people? Later, Piaget, his views were put forth that the foundations of intelligence were unconditionally supported by the type and manner of a child's motor development. And Winnicott, too, pediatrician, psychoanalyst, who coined the term good holding, bad holding, in the effort to educate parents of the impact of a healthy developmental movement history. This single idea of citing movement as a precursor to knowledge is what my teacher, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, has used since the 70s as the basis for her work, something called body-mind centering. Her work comes at the end of a century-long interest in the impact of motor development on both cognition and emotion. Cohen and others are interested in the fact that the first pair of cranial nerves to myelinate in the fetus are the vestibular nerves, which assist with the orientation of the body in space. Eileen Heaney, Bank Street infant specialist, has said the infant must move or act on his world in order to know it. Therefore, movement is a primary sense of the caliber, reals, synesthete, or vital sense. The question remains whether it was proprioception which lay in the very specific places in the body. Now I have to say that again. The question remains whether proprioception that lays in the specific places of the body, okay, now I'm going to go anatomical, the inner spindles of the fibers of the muscle, inside of the fibers, the Golgi bodies which are at the edge of the joints, and the articular capsules of the joint. This is the only place where proprioception happens. It doesn't happen in your chest or in your, you have to have that push. Okay. Is this the vital sense, is my question. It wasn't until decades later that theorists, including Cohen, Bonnie, were able to deepen their knowledge of proprioception simply by moving. Movement, they realized, was the stimulator for proprioception. And I think, now I'm getting to my point, is that I think Olson knew this. And I quote, to which proprioception, semicolon, the data of depth sensibility.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Okay. To which proprioception, semicolon, the data of depth sensibility. That's from proprioception. To further clarify yield, push, reach, and pull, what we just did, these are the four basic qualities that Bainbridge Cohen assigned to the progression of human movement development. But they also are the foundation stones for our house, in capitals, our house, the depth sensibility, that vital sense that functions to proprioceptively define and determine tone, placement, I've lost my place, and orientation. Proprioception is all living creatures' responsive system, a technology of survival that carries with it a whole series of patterns and responses that occur in overlapping waves. Earlier patterns provide a solid base for later ones, and once established, are subsumed into higher levels of movement ability and increasing complex physical and mental tasks. This is rolling, crawling, creeping, standing, okay?